The views and opinions expressed by the guests of the Inspira Podcast do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of any agency of the United States government or any organization, public or private.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Inspira Podcast, hosted by your girl, me, Erika Mueller Chen. I'm an international development specialist with over a decade of experience leveraging the amazing power of sport to promote peace and positive social impact. My career has allowed me to live in Europe, Southern Africa, and Latin America. In 2022, I accepted an offer for my dream job in sports diplomacy. And I also became an employee family member to a U.S. diplomat, aka an EFM. This podcast is all about inspiration and career advice. Each episode, I'll interview an inspirational global changemaker working in sport for development, social impact, or the diplomatic service. This series is perfect if you have interest in breaking into one of these sectors, or you've already landed that dream role and are keen to learn from thought leaders. Enjoy today's episode and stay inspired.
I definitely didn't see myself doing this. I definitely didn't see this happening now. If someone was to tell me 10 years ago there's a role where you can travel the world and use sport as a tool to help young people and get paid for it, I would have said, where? Sign me up. That's impossible. Everyone's going to want to do that.
Welcome, friends. Today we are here with Mr. Lee Parker. He is a sport for development enthusiast who brings experience working with grassroots organizations globally to help build their capacity and impact. Lee is currently the Senior Programs and Grants Manager at the very well-known Laureus Sport for Good, based out of their London office. He's responsible for building relationships and networks, resourcing and distributing funding to organizations across South America, Africa, and the UK. Lee comes from a multi-ethnic background and is a first-generation Ecuadorian Iranian. Lee's upbringing and experiences in a multi-diverse part of London have shaped him to become not only an enthusiast in sport, and in particular basketball, but also an advocate for communities to removing barriers for people just like him. And I believe, Lee, you also got engaged recently, so congrats on that one. You've got a lot going on, a lot of exciting things in the works.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was thinking that's like a perfect LinkedIn bio, and then you added in the engaged bit at the end.
Yeah, and I'll also add, I was going to mention it later, but you and I, we like a nice glass of wine. We also like our tacos. So, just adding the personal flavor there so that people really know you and me, especially you today.
That's it. Yeah, if only we had like this happening in Mexico, then I'm sure it would look a bit different. But next time.
Definitely. Lee, for this podcast, I've named it Inspira. I try to make it about inspiration and career advice. And so before jumping into the questions, something I like to do is just mention why my guest inspires me. You inspire me because you're always down to collaborate and just like a really good human. I know you and I met a few years ago in London, and I've really enjoyed staying in touch with you. Not only are you, passionate about supporting young people and organizations to realize and reach their full potential, but you're really committed to including them in those approaches and those solutions. So really excited to, learn what that looks like for you and where that comes from throughout your career and throughout your life. So pumped to learn more about you today in this podcast setting.
Oh, that's very sweet, right? And I think it takes one to know one, and I kind of gravitate to like-minded people and just try and see the best in everyone as much as you can and be intentional with how you do things.
Just for starters, I know before the call, I asked you a little bit about your recent travel. Can you fill us in on where you've been the last couple of months, any of the work stuff, any of the fun stuff?
Yeah. So like before the call, we were just talking offline, and it's quite shameless. It's quite shameful at the same time. Like my job allows me to travel to places very unique allows me to see amazing things and see the great impact. But then it also allows me to stay a while and see how things are done, and then just engross myself in the culture and learn more about the people of that country and how things are done. And that's the best way to learn. Very recently, I was in India, and I was there as part of my role with Laureus to support one of our Sport for Good Cities programs that we have in Delhi, in a part of Delhi called Simapuri, which is a population of around 100,000 people. There's high levels of poverty, high levels of discrimination against women and girls, no infrastructure or no projects for sport or activities, and a lot of things that the kids get up to there is basically playing cards or smoking, because there's just not much activities there. So we've been doing some work there over the past couple of years to implement a program for the people of Simapuri that brings organizations that work together there and the community to come together and decide how they're going to impact the community through sport and change those things. So recently it was the 1 year anniversary of the program, and I went there to meet my colleague Renu, who's driving the program, and I got to see the amazing work that's happened in just 1 year of them building a coalition of like-minded people and a community that is just like, they're just driving this project by themselves with Lauria's support and my kind of guidance from afar. They've just completely, it's just like you're entering a mini sport town, football sessions happening, and speaking to the elders and the families in the community, and the young girls. I had a chance to speak to all these people who have just expressed their thanks and the good work that's happened when all these people have come together to drive change, and girls are now playing sport and seeing opportunities and aspirations beyond what they saw before, just by playing football and learning more about their sexual health rights and basic rights, interview skills. It just, the list is endless. So that was part of my trip there, and I was there for a week to see a lot of partners and the work that's happening there. Whilst I'm on the topic, like one thing that was like really inspiring was I went there and I met some of the young girls that work under Renu, who have kind of been inspired by her, and they came up to me and they showed me a constitution that they made for an NGO that they've created, like off their back. So these girls are no older than 19, 20. Like they've just been literally inspired by what's been happening, and they've created their own NGO. They've gone out to create a constitution. They've tried to do events, and they're growing. They want it to be a youth-led NGO in this part of Delhi to inspire more girls to become the next generation. And yeah, I mean, they really took it to me, and I was just blown away. Like, that's half the job right there. The legacy of being able for them to be inspired and to continue the journey. And we're just there to facilitate that. Like if we can get funding towards them to continue that, then that's most of the job done, and there's a legacy there. So I was very lucky to see that. Yeah, and then the other part of my trip is I just went off to Dubai after that to see some friends and have some sun and relax. And yeah, my bank balance isn't really in a good place right now.
But your heart is full, right?
My heart is full. My belly is full. My head hurts a little bit, but it's okay.
Yeah. Wow, that is mind blowing what you said, that right when you visit, I mean, the program's maybe been running a year perhaps, and you've already got participants or people been inspired by local leaders to say, yeah, I'm going to do that. Like, why not me? And then come up with this plan. So that's what it's about. And that also gives you comfort, whatever kind of seat you're in within the sport for development structure, like especially more on the capacity building or like funder side, because you always think about what it's going to be 2, 3, 4 years down the line for the communities in which you're working. And so just to have that, stability and that, reality that people are continuing the work is really, really special and encouraging.
Yeah, it's a harsh reality. Like, and again, I implore anyone who's listening, like, if you do get an opportunity to visit, whether it's in your country or abroad, to visit like a the communities where they say you shouldn't be going to, or there isn't much going on. There's a lot going on. There's just the infrastructure, the support just hasn't been given. The communication isn't great, and people can't wear multiple hats. They're busy trying to change things. And when you go and see some of these programs, and obviously the best way to do it is to try and be very humble about it, um, and not kind of go with a big microscope. But you kind of start to you see the bigger picture of everything exists already. Like the ingredients are all there. The people are there. The ambition is there. No one inadvertently doesn't want to help or is not interested in sport. Everyone does want to do sport and find a way to integrate it. But the reality is that there's other priorities that come before that, whether it's sanitation, hunger, just employment. There's things that will just really give you that reality. But the bottom line is that with this example, with the work in India, in a place which is like, it's described as a slum, and a lot of people live in like 7 people in one room, and it's like in an area where there's a lot of garbage and rubbish, and the job is to separate the rubbish and stuff like that. There's still hope, and the light is there to they just need someone to facilitate that, whether it's Laureus or a Renu or a local NGO or the police, whoever it is that has the power to kind of say, look, let's kind of give you this equipment or whatever you need, the base to help you drive your ideas and the trust, and it usually just takes off if you just do that.
Well, that's a great teaser into what we're going to talk about today. Your work at Laureus.
Yeah. End of the interview.
And so thank you for taking my very simple question of where have you been and educating us. So Lee, take me back a little bit more to the beginning. I know in the bio I read, I talked about how you being first generation Ecuadorian, Iranian, growing up in London has really shaped you as a human, and then also that interest in basketball and sport. What was it like growing up, and how did some of those influences shape you, whether it was cultural or geographical or sporty? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have enough time to dig into my like growing up experiences, and not because it's like an epic like Bible story. It's just because there's a lot going on. So like to give you like a condensed version, my name Lee Parker, and something which I touch on a bit more as I got older is like that name really doesn't resonate to anyone. The surname doesn't mean anything. If anything, it's just the surname I had when my mom came to this country and married someone for papers. And so that name stuck, and the name Lee stuck as well because she liked that name. So when she arrived, she came to East London, just outside Barking, very Cockney area, and worked with some people there to look after an older lady who happened to be from Spain. They looked after her. Then she met my dad, and he was from Iran, and they met somewhere in the 80s on a dance floor. They had me. They didn't stay together, and then I live with my mom, and I didn't really get to know my Iranian side. So already it's just like the Ecuadorian culture or the Iranian culture doesn't reflect in my name. But as I was growing up, that that was fine. My mom was really kind of like did an amazing job. I like to think. And then as I grew up, I kind of was growing up in West London with my mom and my stepdad, and being raised in a kind of multicultural environment, whether it's at home with the Latin parties and the salsa and the culture that you have there, or whether it's outside when you live in a place like Shepherd's Bush, where there's people from the Caribbean community, Somali community, Polish, everything you can imagine. So you're already in a bit of a kind of multicultural world, and my identity didn't really play a role in how I was being shaped. But there were things that I was growing up, and I did realize that I was put in the Asian category because I looked Asian, and those connotations that come with it, the negative tones of people being racist in London was very prominent back then. but it never really like impacted me in a place where it was like, oh my God, this is really deep. But it did make me question like things around my own upbringing and where I'm from and who I am and my mix and my name and stuff like that. So throughout all this, I managed to create great friendships in the area, and went to play basketball at a local sports hall, a local youth club, and that's where I met my like first kind of real mentor, coach who kind of believed in me, and you know, basketball wasn't really like something I just went to. I just happened to be all right at it, and then I just happened to be encouraged by it at a very young age. And I think at that young age is really important to people that attach to themselves to a sport. If they're just getting the support and the motivation to just be listened to or acknowledged, then they're very likely to stick to it. And that's what happened to me. And I stayed through basketball and had friends there that we all played games together and stuff. And again, very multicultural. And I've always kind of like seen how the coach was and the impact of youth work at that age, even though I didn't really know what was happening. I did see the impact of having a role model and being inspired and having these friendship groups. And then as I got older, that just always stuck to me. I've always been big into sports, always loved boxing, football, basketball. But I always remembered those kind of grassroots days, and they come with difficulties in an area where you probably get mugged after basketball sessions, and you probably encounter some things, but you also have a lot of fun. And there was a lot of like banter of like just kids being kids in this part of town, and we had a lot of fun. And that kind of shaped who I was, those kind of relationships and the sport as I was having, and just being listened to. And then as I started getting older, with, you know, keeping my childhood in mind, I started seeing inequalities that were a bit like, hang on a minute, you know, where I was raised is the north of the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and the south of that borough is where Kensington Palace is, and is probably one of the richest places in the world. And they share the same borough. So a stat that you wouldn't see is the difference between these two sides and the inequalities, where you can see a chicken shop down the road and then further 5-minute walk, probably one of the best houses you've ever seen. Like, and then, as you know, and this is probably links to things like the Grenfell fire, and I don't know if you've heard about that, but there was like a big fire that happened in London. That was a lot blamed on institutional racism and just lack of care for people that lived in these type of high-rise buildings, and the other side of the borough is untouched. So I started seeing all these things and working even before that happened. But I just started working in the community and working with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who might have had a similar journey to me, might not have, but just haven't been given a chance to do what they want to do. And that's what shaped me up to this day to do what I do, and why I play basketball, and why I, you know, tend to have a lot of faith with people that think like me.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful snapshot into what it looked like, what it felt like, you know, the good and the not so good. But it really sounds like the not so good, you started to figure out, you know, what are the solutions that you or others can bring to support people who either had similar challenges to you, or people who you might have been around, especially from the youth side of things, thinking about how sport can do that, and mentorship. So you've definitely used that, you know, for the power of good, which is so relevant to what you're up to today. And I'm wondering, Lee, if you can give us kind of maybe the career side of that story. So now I've got kind of like the personal, the identity side of that story. When did you start working, and what types of roles did you have maybe leading up to Laureus?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my journey in sport for development probably started like good 12 years ago. And like many people back then, you know, you finish uni. At uni, I was lucky to do sport for development. But looking back at it, when I was doing the course, it really didn't really encompass a lot of what it is today. It probably didn't make sense. I don't think a lot of the lecturers, no offense, but they were still trying to figure it out. And it was in its infancy. Yeah. And it was a topic that was quite laughable, like good 20 years ago now, when I did like a course in college, in secondary, like just after secondary school. And it's a true story. I remember the tutor actually like got caught saying, they introduced sports science as like a course, and the tutor got caught saying like, sports science, what are they going to do with this? And I was like, this is the guy that's going to be he's going to be teaching us, like, he
Oh
does
my
science on the other
goodness.
hand. So it just shows you the little journey of like sport and, the studies that, especially in the UK. But I digress. So with my career, like I was interested in marketing and comms. I thought that was like something that I would be good at. I had no idea what I was doing. But then I started to just naturally gravitate. And I think this comes down to my mum. She's always been involved in the community. She's very proud to kind of sit on boards and attend local rallies, and she knows everyone. And she put me in like a bit of a placement with a local NGO to help run some gym they had like a community gym that was just run down, equipment from the 80s, and they were like, oh, maybe you can help volunteering doing 2 days a week with these guys and get some experience. And I was like, yeah, that's great, I'll do that. And it's a gym and getting involved in the community, I'm pretty sure I can create like a flyer or something and get people involved to do that stuff. And then I think from there I started to like just pick up community-based intervention, and sport wasn't really on my mind. It was just like the hook to make me enjoy that job. But what I really started to enjoy was speaking to people and connecting the dots and finding solutions and collaborations. Like you said, I always think it's easier when you just find people to work together and find a way to make it happen. And from then on, I then applied for a role at the Dame Pilly Homes Trust, a Dutch double Olympic gold medalist who started her own organization in the UK, all about helping disadvantaged young people through sport. And I went for a job, and I remember I didn't get the job, but I think one of the things that helped me was part of the interview was I had to write a letter to a young child who was rejected for something, and the feedback that I got was there was a lot of empathy in the letter, and they managed to make a job up for me to do like reception work or admin or something like that. And I took it. I was like, well, this seems like a great opportunity. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm not too proud to. I don't even know what the real job really entailed, so I just did it. And then as I did that role, I started to be more. I put my nose in a lot of things. Like I can be quite a bit of a sponge and be a bit of a nuisance. And I saw the programs that they were running with young people, and I got invited to come along. And naturally, I just went along, and they were like 6-week cohorts with children and young people to make them more confident and build skills. And I did like a couple of cohorts and became friends and kind of like friend/mentor, because I wasn't leading, but I was just there. And it just happened naturally, and that's when I started to be given more responsibility on that side of things, delivering programs. And I started designing the programs, working with the athletes that were leading the program, and started to drive the initiative within Dame Pilly Homes Trust. And then I was there for a couple of years during the London Olympics, and then I went back to my old community. I did some work near the Grenfell Tower, working in that community and trying to get the local schools, local people to just work together to make the holiday camps more inclusive and get everyone together to do different sports other than football and rugby. And I introduced like art and skateboarding and music and making things more fun. Very Americanized like way of. I was just like, we need to do something else, and it was great. People just saw different things and gave kids opportunity to do something else other than football, and a lot more girls as well.
Nice.
Introduced like spoken word, really just trying that people were doing these things in the community. It's like just bring them together and create a schedule and make it happen. After that, I then went to Centrepoint to work at a homeless charity. And this was more kind of working with curriculums to help homeless young people that live in hostels around London, and providing them with a sport curriculum that had an element of nutrition and skills for employability and confidence building. And again, I just kind of managed that side of things and worked with, again, more athletes who were leading the program to make these kids and young people kind of look into more long-term housing which was really great. And then after that, I moved to a place called London Youth and worked more with the youth groups in London the NGOs that were working with children and young people and trying to build their capacity for them. And that was a tough gig. Like that was like a really big, more strategic kind of element. And I learned a lot there around, what capacity building was I started to see things a bit differently about what that looked like and how to help these groups collectively and more pan London. It's a massive city. But then I went to Laureus, and that's where I saw this role for working on the funder side. So already I kind of like had the experience of all the delivery and working with young people, had the experience of being that young person myself who was on a funded program, even though I didn't even know it, and recognize that, okay, maybe I can bring more to the table on the funder side. And that's what happened. And I've been there now for 5 years, just growing and learning to this day. But all the experiences beforehand up from my childhood and old jobs, high and low, have shaped how I do my role today. And that's probably why I'm leading on the initiative around Sport for Good Cities, which is about, communities coming together and letting them decide where the money goes and working with them to make that happen. So yeah, that's my career journey.
Quick break here to highlight what I consider to be a fabulous resource that I've created for any listeners out there interested in learning more about the sport for development and peace sector. You've come to the right place. In addition to Inspira Podcast episodes that you can listen to, I've created a written resource that you can read, which currently has over 90 items I've curated from my own experience and vetted with other experts in the field. These include databases to find award-winning organizations, links to reports, books, and research, as well as recommended newsletters and recorded webinars, all Sport for Dev related. I encourage you to have a look. You can find this resource by visiting my LinkTree, listed in each episode's show notes. Then clicking Erika's Global Resource Hub. That's right, Erika's Global Resource Hub. If you like what you read and what you hear, I'd love it if you could give Inspira a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and write a kind review. That would be so energizing for me, and it would help Inspira reach more ears. Thanks, and back to the show.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
Yeah, that's amazing. And as you said, it positions you really well to understand the communities that you're aiming to support now on the funder side. I'm curious if that, 12 years ago, perhaps I know the answer to this, but 12 years ago, did you see yourself in this type of role, working in sport for development? And were you kind of trying to get there?
I definitely didn't see myself doing this. I definitely didn't see this happening now. If someone was to tell me 10 years ago, there's a role where you can travel the world and use sport as a tool to help young people and get paid for it, I would have said, where? Sign me up. That's impossible. Everyone's going to want to do that. And I didn't really know much about international development.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just kind of following my nose, basically. I was always trying to keep my head above water, and money wasn't a massive thing. I knew I needed a salary, and
Mm-hmm.
I also accepted, I did kind of limit myself a little bit at the beginning, where I limited myself to just work in the third sector and see that, you're not going to get paid a certain amount. You're only going to do certain things, and it's going to be working with young people, helping people. So I never really saw beyond, a program manager, or I never saw myself as having that strategic nous to do something, because I just didn't have that experience, or I never really was raised in those circles to get that idea and inspiration. But that slowly changes as you go through the motions and you start putting yourself in different rooms, and you start to not question yourself, and you start to realize, your ideas are valid, and it doesn't need a validation every time. You should be trusting yourself. And that's something that I just took from job to job. I started to trust my instinct on new ideas. I started to rely on my experience, not just my experience in work and experience in jobs, but also just my experience as someone who is from that type of community, who knows how certain things work and culture I started to put things together and realize that I don't have the answer, but it's definitely something to try, and people gravitate towards me deciding on, right, this is probably a good idea on how to do things and build trust and empathy and things like that. So in short, it was never expected to get to this point, and to be fair, it's still, as I get older, I start to get more experience, and things like what I'm doing now, I wouldn't think that someone would ask me to speak on their podcast 10 years ago, because your mindset is just so limited. But that changes as you go on, and you just realize you have more to give to the world than what the world expects from you. And it's just been a bit of a mind shift, and it's still a journey, and I don't think it really ends. So.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I just want to pull out a few of the strengths that you mentioned. Even if you don't know you're mentioning your strengths, I really think that they've contributed to your success. So one, something that you said a little bit earlier, that you're a sponge, like you really try to soak up information and knowledge. And then two, you just mentioned you put yourself in these rooms to have these conversations. You put yourself out there. Three, speaking up and trusting yourself. Those three strengths leading to a potential result, a potential benefit, what you mentioned about the ability to build trust and empathy. And that's really the key to a lot of this work, a lot of what you do, a lot of what I've done. Well, I'll ask you about the mission of Laureus in a minute, but while we're on this train of thought of allowing people to feel heard and using empathy to build trust, how has that interacted with you as a funder, kind of being in that position? And there's an obvious power dynamic when it comes to organizations that have financial resources that are supporting other organizations. How has that empathy served you, and maybe what are kind of the limitations for what you can do in your position, maybe more on like the personal side, if you've got people asking you for favors, or you build this trust and then you want to do more, but maybe you just can't based off of the resources available to you.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I think it's all about being quite honest and managing expectations from the start. It's also about trust. Like, you have to trust the people you work with, especially with funding. There are some kind of non-negotiables to just kind of make sure things are happening in a certain way. Not everything is perfect, but you have to just lay out the expectations and make sure it's a two-way street. One story that I have is, like, when I started at Laureus, I remember I was managing grantee partnership with a big organization, and I just took the role on to, I followed the rules of making sure we had like a monthly catch up, and as we were doing that, having that one-to-one relationship with me, kind of expecting a call every month or trying to provide support just for the sake of following the process, was quite a waste of time, because there wasn't really much that I could do for them, and they were kind of doing their own thing, and to be honest, probably quite bigger than what we were and what we still are. And then that just taught me like a harsh lesson of like, yeah, I need to just kind of not follow that rule book, of that funder partner relationship of how many times you catch up or what's happening and stuff like that, and just incorporating trust. I learned very quickly to leave the lines of communication open. I learned very quickly it's not just about talking about the money or what's happening with the money. It was more, my role is to facilitate any collaboration, any networking, anything that will make your job easier, anything that will make your reporting less hazardous and time consuming. and that's how I've done things. And I, you
Mm-hmm.
know, managing grants, and I hate saying managing grants because it's just, there's people out there that have multiple funders, and then they have to speak to 8 different people that are like me, and some of them, you know, need their ego checked. And this is why it's really important to visit these places,
Mm.
and you'll see some of these projects, and some of the it's something which has been induced by the ecosystem of funders, that, you know, a lot of organizations don't have strong bid writers because they don't speak the lingo of a funder,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't speak the way that we speak in the global north about, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where money goes. And we can look at an application and be like, that's not good enough, that doesn't make sense. And it could make perfect sense, but just when it comes down to technical stuff, or, you know, it just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, and they can get a no. And I've seen that happen, not necessarily at Laureus, you know, not to catch anyone out, but
Yep.
yeah, I've heard stories about that, you know, with other funders who just don't have the experience or understand who they're working with. And once you connect with someone, build a relationship, see what they do, speak to the young people, you can get an application from them and just be like, you know, I don't need to, I can understand what they're doing. I can look at their webpage, I can speak to them and understand more. And that's where the trust comes in. And I think that's what's helped me be really kind of mindful of those relationship boundaries. And again, it's probably directed me to where I'm at with this Sport for Good Cities, where it's not really working with a grantee, it's working with a steering group of
Mm-hmm.
organizations to drive something.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to just implore uh, that balance to them as well, because that exists in the communities as well, where bigger organizations they run the roost, so to speak, and they control the narrative, they control the money, but they need to take the smaller organizations with them. And sometimes that's hard for them as well, because the funding world has created an ecosystem where people will compete with each other for funding. So yeah, I've gone off a bit on a tangent there, but and the reason why we do the type of work we do now, but that's pretty much how I deal with that. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why Laureus exists and some of the different initiatives or models over the years that you've either been involved with or you're aware of, historically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, with Laureus, they've been around for 20 years, and they initially started off as a call to action for athletes to be more involved and advocate for sport. And Nelson Mandela did the speech at the first awards, which is, you know, used a lot by different parts of the sector.
That
And
quote and photo and Laureus
yeah,
background. I mean, you could see it on every sport for development person or organization,
exactly.
which is super cool.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people were doing this before we even got involved. As time has gone on, and we're quite open about this, is it's never a space owned by Laureus. And as one of my colleagues said, like, you know, we're not the kingmakers of it. Like, I think the prestige of the awards and Mandela's speech gives it that narrative that, you know, we're trying to drive something by ourselves, but it definitely isn't. And in my time, and probably a bit of time before I joined, Laureus has always been um, trying to be at the forefront, especially more recently, to create networks and bring people together. So things like learning communities is something which we've done a lot of and still continue to do, bringing people that are working towards gender equality and using sport from around the world to share learning, share resources, talk about theory of change, build capacity, and just kind of cross-cultural learning to improve whatever they can. And we just facilitate that. We've also been involved in conversations with wider policy sectors and people like the UN and UNICEF to really drive whatever policy change is needed, whether it's safeguarding or the work that we're doing with community-based intervention, to kind of really bring it to policy level and influence policy. So the people that are in power, the people that can make the change, and you'll know more about this as you start to go forward, to have the keys to kind of unlock that funding and long-term change in their community, in their country. And ultimately, Laureus's purpose is to be able to facilitate a lot of this, and for Laureus to not really exist in the future if all things go to plan, you know. there's plenty more that Laureus is involved in, and we're just involved in the loads of circles, and we have quite a big team globally, and you've met some of them. The partners that we work with, we work like as a bit of an intermediary funder, so we don't, we a lot of the funding we get is from other people and not necessarily just ourselves. Like we don't sit on a gold mine, as much as that would be great.
Not a
Like
Mercedes gold mine.
Mercedes gold mine, that would be amazing if we just decided what we could do. But we work with organizations to really help them embed sport for development, and we also try to learn from them so we can take it to another place in the world and create this network of learning and opportunity. And just, it's all focused on children and young people.
And for anyone listening, kind of newer to the space, they'll certainly learn that Laureus is one of the biggest names in sport for development. I'm wondering, Lee, if you can share any insights into how you got your foot in the door, or maybe how other people can get their foot in the door if there's an opening or might be an opening down the line.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, they are a big name, but I'll be honest, like I didn't know who they were. I only knew them for the awards because I was a bit of a fanboy for awards. I was always quite interested in the award. I didn't watch the awards, but I'd always be like, oh, that's like Federer versus, I don't know, Lewis Hamilton. That's very rare to see sports come up against each other. And then you'd kind of read about it and be like, oh, he's won. That's a big win. So I guess putting my foot in the door, I saw the role, and it was more for like a junior role, and being a grants manager. I think the biggest strength there was showing my ambition and attitude to learn, like really pick up. So again, it's not in terms of like those things about putting your foot in the door. You do need a bit of luck. You need to have someone on the other side who's doing the conversations or doing the interviews to take a bit of a leap of faith and ask questions of yourself. And I was lucky to have that aspect with me. And when it came down to the interviews and doing stuff, I just stayed true to the empathy stuff that I spoke about. A lot of the questions were around empathy and relationships, and there were questions on budgets and stuff like that. And that's Excel isn't my strong point, and that's something which I had to take on and learn. But again, it was the priorities of your values matching what Laureus was, is what made me kind of get the job at the end. And that, I don't think it answers much of a question of how I put my foot in the door, but I think, just I would rather look at my experience beforehand in those jobs where I got offered another job for something else, and it was just about mindsets of when you are given a chance to do something, to just grab it with both hands and don't be afraid to fail, ask the right questions, or the wrong questions, be inquisitive, and just try things and shadow, ask people what they do and learn, and be a bit of a sponge. And if you can find ways to connect dots and make things happen, then people will give you that chance to do it. And that's what I found helped me to do things.
Well, Lee, I asked that question not because you didn't have the resume for it, because you surely had the ideal resume for it, as we talked about in the earlier parts of this interview. But I'm always just curious kind of how, if anyone did anything unique, right, to get in. So thanks for entertaining that. Do you feel like your experiences when you were younger and kind of learning more about your identity and how you're perceived in different communities has helped you in understanding other cultures or in integrating into these many different cities and countries that you've either worked in or visited?
100%. Like, I mean, I see myself cut from a different cloth compared to many people that might be in my industry or in my job. The way I talk, the way I look, my name will come up. If you don't see me, you would assume someone else, and then you see me, and then things don't make sense. But then, like, it just allows me to, go to places, whether it's a Mexico or Delhi. I'm coming in with a bit of an understanding of that culture, of that language. There's a bit of me that is a bit more open and not painfully avoidant, or not painfully aware that I'm very different. There's some sort of middle ground there that allows me to do that. And I mean, it could be anyone that could go into these communities and have the same personality as me. They could be a white person who speaks like me in the same area, and they could very well be just as welcomed and connect as quickly as I do. But for me, that's those initial barriers already reduced, and I just know from my experiences of working in certain, or being raised in a certain community and not seeing a lot of the stuff that a lot of these communities see daily, helps me kind of understand their situation to an extent. I don't understand the poverty. I don't understand that way of living, because that's just ignorant of me to say that. Like, I was raised with running water and hot water and stuff like that. But there's just those things where, community at the heart of stuff, and as much negativity that's happening in the community, there's so much happiness and spread. And that's something which I've just grasped from my own kind of upbringing, or listening to my mother about stuff in Ecuador, and going back to Ecuador and seeing happiness, even though there's poverty. It's helped me a lot to kind of integrate swiftly into wherever I go, and just absorb as much as I can.
Nice.
Including the food. Right, so.
That's a part of integration. That's a part of learning the culture. You have to eat and drink alongside the locals. So, yeah.
Right.
Now that we know more about our guest's career journey, the rest of our conversation will allow us to have some fun and get to know our guest on a personal level through some rapid fire questions. We'll then start to wrap up with pointed questions focused on advice and how our listeners can transform interest into action. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. Who's your football team?
Queen's Park Rangers.
Do you have a best sports memory?
Yeah, I think probably not me participating, but me watching was like, overall the best sports memory was just seeing Ecuador in the 2006 World Cup. And it was like small countries, like, they were in the World Cup before, but now they were like there, and they meant it. They were there to compete. And I think they beat Poland 2-0, and everyone was surprised and shocked. And I wasn't. I was like, I knew that would happen. But watching it on TV and wearing the shirt, it was like Ecuador is like a small country that's now a bit more known. That was a very proud moment. I'll never forget that. And then we lost to England in the quarterfinals, which was like a weird experience for me, because I was like, I think I still wanted Ecuador to win, which was weird for me to do. And then Beckham scored a free kick and they won 1-0. So it was a win-win, but at the same time, I did feel a bit sad for the small country and, like my heritage.
If you had to choose, would you choose dancing or singing?
Dancing, 100%. Yeah.
Best dance club in London?
Probably salsa in London. That's probably the best one. That's not that I'm not that good. It's just one of the best ones that I've seen. So, yeah.
Do you have a favorite music artist?
I really like Bad Bunny.
I thought you were going to say that for some reason.
It's probably all the Instagram posts and the subliminal music that you hear that I put on it. I really, he's got a great voice. He's a great person. Like, he doesn't conform to a lot of what's happening. He's speaking up for a lot of the people's rights, and he's just amazing. And I just, it'd be great to see him or meet him or see him live. And I've got a lot of time for Bad Bunny. Yeah.
So there's a rumor that you're a chicken wing lover. Do you have a favorite place to eat wings, or a favorite sauce? Are you a Nando's guy? I don't know if that's like, what we're talking about here,
Good
more
question.
advanced.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a whole podcast on this. Man, I don't know why. Sorry to all the vegan listeners and stuff, but like chicken wings are just the way it just comes off the bone. Like it feels like there's a tear coming down my eye now. But buffalo wings are my thing.
Hmm.
Uh, where I like them the most is they Brewdog does a good chicken wing. Definitely check them out. And in London, it's just chicken shops galore, so you're gonna find where the chicken wings and yeah, I mean, yeah, I can't wait. I probably haven't even scraped the barrel of the best ones, and I need to do a tour of America and go to the deep south, and that's where I'll really find, that's probably my aspiration. That's my
That's
future.
the second foundation you're gonna
Yeah,
open. You know, one empowerment, the other chicken wings. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
If there's anyone interested in breaking into sport for development and peace, what advice would you give them?
I'd say start very local. Like I think I didn't know this was going to help me, but working in the local community and really digging deep in terms of what the local stakeholders or how things work, um, policy level, like the local council. If you could find a way to volunteer or just connect with someone and work with another coach, work in a youth club and just help do the cones, do the balls, do I did some of that stuff and it was really rewarding, but at the same time gave me the skills to understand, how these coaches or how people interact with parents, how they interact with other coaches, other providers, and the issues that they face when they're booking a sports hall. All these little things that you don't really see. Washing the kit, not having equipment, all positives and negatives. I think if you find a way to just trust yourself to just give a day or two a week to just do that, people will appreciate that help, and you'll learn very quickly how things are done, and opportunities will come up within those organizations if they're growing for you to do a role and evolve from there. So rather than just jumping to seeing the laureate job and you see a lot of it, people will work their way to just get to a laureate or to a UNICEF or whatever it is, because it's a big name. It's necessarily the holy grail. Like I think it's people that come to laureates go into other things when they leave. It's not the end goal. As people do their own thing, but if you can find a way to start locally and build up those core values and experiences, then the rest will follow.
And in addition to that community oriented experience you mentioned, are there any specific skills you think are quite important to being effective in the sport for development sector?
Yeah, listening skills, like, and you've done that brilliantly today. I think just being able to listen, know, and learning when to talk and what position you're in is fundamental, and it is all people based. Like there are skills, if you know how to do Excel, if you know how to use Salesforce or CSM systems, uh, if you know about monitoring and evaluation, do that, because these skills are very valuable and they're technical, and they're out there. There's resources out there for days to do that, and again, we have connections with people that can provide that. But the key stuff is around how you are as a person and what your values are. Try not to be the loudest voice in the room or dominating the conversation, or people want to hear what you want to say, but you need to find a way that you need to lead from the back and ask questions that make other people find the answers or question what they're doing, and help them get to an answer. So if you can listen and coordinate and facilitate appropriately, if you're open to experiences and understanding context and just having a good relationship with people, and you don't have to chat about work all the time. You can chat about what they've done over the weekend, what they're looking forward to, what's good in the community, what's the food like. There's things you can really create relationships on a very basic level, and the rest again, it will just follow. So the people skills and listening communication is key, and it will takes practice. I don't just walk into this role and know how to talk to people. It's come over time when I've just learned how to react and how to articulate, and that's how I've learned over the years.
What is one thing you hope listeners remember from our conversation today?
Just apart from the chicken wings, I think
Sponsor Lee now. He's open.
yeah, exactly. I would really like them to just take heed to the journey of self-belief, and it's probably more for those that have that self-doubt, and that does exist. And even if you are the most confident, then you probably have a lot of insecurities as well. And I think the journey of how to kind of overcome any self-doubt is what I want them to take away from. It's not perfect, but just question yourself, why do you feel a certain way? What, have a bit of self-therapy and ask yourself how you feel before you action, and then sleep on things, um and then tackle whatever it is that you need to tackle. And it's not the end of the world if it doesn't go to plan.
Thanks, Lee. And how can the audience support you or your work moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about like just finding opportunities where we can create like a change in a community. Like if there is something there, if it's a corporate, if it's a NGO, if it's a group of young people that are just trying to start something, then get in touch. Whether it's like with myself or my colleagues at Laureus, and the partners that we have, the networks that we connect with, like we can always refer and connect and seize on those opportunities, and not necessarily by Laureus. So we're not just everywhere, but I think just those kind of things, getting in touch is how you can help, especially, and check out the Sport for Good Cities initiative that Laureus is doing. I'm happy to share the pages on that, and see how we kind of are doing place-based work, and the methodology behind that work, and how long it takes, and staying a while, learning about that. It'd be great for people to just implore that, find out more, and take it on themselves. If they're working somewhere else or they're doing something else, you can adopt that and do it, whether it's in the arts world or whatever it may be, in different generations, in the workplace, how to do like collective decision making, diplomacy, and make it authentic, and get buy-in from everyone, and make it bottom up. Just go ahead and do that.
I've already got a part 2 and part 3 of this conversation. If it's not chicken wings, it's definitely going to be what you just said, like how to make that model work and the methodology. There's so much to unpack there. So next time, or that's a reason to reach out to Lee and find out, what that all means. So finally, Lee, you gave me permission to ask you this question and invite you to answer in Spanish if you're comfortable. Lee, who inspires you?
I'll go with mi mamá. Mi mamá es una mujer muy fuerte, que llegó en este país, en Londres, sin conocer a nadie, muy joven. Hació muchas cosas como no eran correctos. No son malos, pero ella lo pasó así. Pero siempre como, I'll say this in English because I can't do it in Spanish, but like she always protected me, and made sure that I felt special, and gave me the life that I had. And I saw a very strong woman who just connected with the community, and made sure that I was just able to do whatever I wanted to be or do. It was never forced. And to this day, she's still out there, and kind of walking the beat, and embracing the community. Todavía está muy fuerte, y pienso que todas las cosas que yo tengo vienen de ella. Somos diferentes, pero somos iguales al mismo tiempo, y por eso me inspira, porque the journey that she had to come here and to get this far, I've just taken it on and used it to the best I could, and that's why she's the most inspiring person to me.
She sounds like a force to be reckoned with. So shout out to Lee's mom. Lee, thank you so much for your time, your insights, sharing your story with us, your inspiration and your advice. It's been awesome catching up with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. Time just flew. Hopefully we can do another one again. But thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Inspira Podcast with Erika Mueller-Chen. I really hope you enjoyed the episode and found it useful. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources. Specifically, my LinkTree is there with tons of awesome information. Feel inspired to take action today? I've got 3 action steps you can take right now because you know your girl likes calls to action and the number 3. So here goes. Number 1, follow the podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Number 2, share your feedback with me through the listener survey listed on that LinkTree. And number 3, tell just one friend about this podcast so they can give it a listen too. And do I have any overachievers out there? I've got a bonus action step, which is to consider supporting me and making sure this passion project prospers. So, number 4, follow the link to buy me a coffee. That would be pretty amazing. Until next time, stay inspired.
Wanna hear you go.